Hello. Not long ago, the European Court of Human Rights has endorsed the move to determine that criticism or perceived insults to the Prophet Muhammad no longer count as freedom of expression. Now, basically, this means that anything that is deemed to be insulting to Muslims is therefore not to be considered freedom of conscience, freedom of thought. This is extremely dangerous, and this is why. The European Court of Human Rights is a powerful body, and it has influence on jurisdiction in all 27 EU member states. Now, to be clear, it's not directly a European Union body, but it is closely related to the European Union. And when I heard about this, I was frankly appalled. Um, it's just staggering to see what Western liberal democracies are doing to themselves in the name of so-called tolerance. Now, the official reason they've given for this is to preserve religious harmony in Europe. And yet, this is only going to inflame tensions. We wonder why neo-nationalist groups are on the rise. It's because of things like this. And to be clear, I have no time for blood and soil nationalism. No time at all. But it's important to understand what's going on here. This is not about protecting Muslims from hate crimes, which would be totally fine. That would be a legitimate issue if we were talking about Muslims, being targeted by hate crimes. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about the perceived insult to a religion, and it's worth pointing out that this is coming at a time when Ireland has made the right choice and got rid of their archaic blasphemy laws. Um, and ironically, today Pakistan has just released Asia Bibi, the high-profile Christian woman who has been persecuted in that country for perceived blasphemy. So that's actually some good news coming from Pakistan. Unfortunately, there has been Neanderthals who have already been calling for death threats and so on. And I hope the security around her is high, and also on the judges and those who are responsible for her release, because they're going to be targets now. Just thinking about this, it's infuriating, and it is the epitome of Cardus, because what the European Court of Human Rights has done is surrendered to theocracy. That's what it is. What it's basically done is said, with this ruling, there can be no debate around Islam, because they say it's about insults to the Prophet Muhammad, but the point is, anything can be perceived as an insult. We're not talking here just about crude cartoons, we're talking about anything that can be perceived as an insult. And given how sensitive Islam is, that means that even academic debate, adult, well measured, reasonable debate is now going to be perceived as not freedom of speech. This is incredibly dangerous, and I have to say, this does make me reassess my views on membership of the European Union. Now, like I said, the European Court of Human Rights isn't directly a body of the EU, but member states have to join it when they join the EU. So it's very closely related. The two are interlinked. And if the EU doesn't distance itself from this ruling, which of course they won't, then it's really telling. Now, I voted Remain, and there are still aspects of Brexit I remain very wary and concerned about, particularly regarding trade and the place of businesses and so on. But this is something that if I was to change my mind, it would be something like this that would probably make me do so. One of the main arguments of Remain is that remaining part of the world, remaining interconnected with other countries. But surely the European Court of Human Rights should uphold human rights. And one core human right is freedom of expression. Now, we live in a world where people can be brutally beaten to death over alleged insults to religion, particularly in Islam. It does happen in other religions. In India, you get Hindu extremism. But Islam, I would argue, is definitely more widespread in terms of Islamic extremism. That's not to say all Muslims have that mentality, of course not. But any intelligent person already knows that that is not the issue here. Muslims in Europe generally don't face a threat on the scale that non-Muslims face in Islamic countries. There's no comparison, because whilst you might get unfortunate isolated incidents of hate crimes, mosques being vandalized and so on, wider society condemns it. In Islamic countries, there is zero tolerance to minorities. I mean, look at a country like Iran, look at Saudi Arabia, look at Pakistan, and notwithstanding the progressive move today, the fact is Pakistani society has a very long way to go. Um, People are murdered in cold blood for perceived insults to Islam. It could even be a rumor. It doesn't even need to be something very crude like calling the Prophet names. It can be a perceived insult. So for the European Court of Human Rights to, and what I find galling is this is an organisation that probably has done some good work on genuine human rights issues, but with this decision they have lost all credibility, because they are endorsing totalitarianism. It's the opposite of human rights. They're making a mockery of their own name, and I'm furious about it, quite frankly. Um, and it's tragic. So it's going to come down to member states to send out a message for genuine liberal secular democracies to say this was a terrible choice, and there needs to be a backlash, a peaceful backlash against the European Court of Human Rights. They need to feel the pressure from this. They need to know that this was an appallingly bad decision. So there needs to be some sort of peaceful backlash, because it's staggering. Now, why they've done it, ostensibly they say it's to preserve the peace in Europe. I think that might be some sort of warped logic, but I think there's more to it. I think probably there's been some powerful lobby groups, probably from the Gulf states. I don't know. I'm not gonna, I don't know. I've no evidence for that, but there has to be some reason they've reached this decision other than just supposedly for stability in Europe. It's just infuriating, and it is just so spineless. It's so cowardly, because what they are doing is putting religious sensitivities before actual human rights. Religious sensitivities are not human rights. Okay, the right for Muslims to be treated as equal citizens is a human right. Um, so it's very depressing when I think about it that they've reached this decision. And looking at their Facebook page, there has been, people have made their feelings clear on this. But what this is essentially saying now is that people could potentially be prosecuted in Europe in the 21st century for offending religion. Think about that for a second. This brings us back to the days of Galileo, when, thinkers, in those days it was Christianity. And for the record, I have no more time for Christian theocracy than any other kind of theocracy. In Brazil, there's worrying signs that President-elect Bolsonaro is going to try and push for some sort of Christian theocracy. Now, I don't believe it's on the same sort of threat scale as Islamic theocracy, but any kind of religious theocracy runs opposite to um, truly progressive thinking. And it's not about being pro or anti-religion. You could be a person of faith and recognize the dangers of theocracy. There's many secular Muslims. Perhaps I shouldn't say many, but there are friends of mine. They're Muslims, but they recognize the need for secularism. Um, By the way, just for the record, that's one reason I'm slightly wary of certain neo-nationalist groups, because they do act like Christian theocracy would be fine, like Christianity is the way to save us from Islamic extremism. It's not, actually. The way to be enlightened and to take on Islamic extremism is by telling the truth, is by challenging mentalities like this. That, I mean, what is appalling is we do live in a world where people are murdered in countries like Pakistan over religion. This is an unforgivable decision, and I hope it comes back to haunt them. I really do. I hope the cowardly bureaucrats who have reached this insane logic really feel pressure to the point where they're forced to backtrack and change it. But I think the damage has already been done, because this is such a profound decision. So regarding Brexit, how's this related? Well, I'm not going to say this has automatically changed my mind on Brexit, because that's not just about one issue, it's about many issues. And there are aspects of leaving the EU I remain very wary of. And I make no apology for that, because I think there are real concerns about the future of business and so on. But civic liberty is a very fundamental thing. And if we are going to be criminalized for discussing Islamic extremism, discussing violence within the Quran, it's frightening, actually. And you know the irony, anybody who recognizes this is now labeled a right winger, far right. It's it's almost like 1984. I mean, I wouldn't call myself a conservative. There's many aspects I'm centre left. But what this is actually doing is pushing people more to the right. The insanity of decisions like this. And I am furious about it. So really, I call on all European citizens, people of goodwill, of all backgrounds, to see common sense and recognise that this decision is a threat to our most dear values of human rights, civic liberty, and freedom of conscience. It's very dangerous, because this will lead to legislation which will curtail freedom of expression. It's making a mockery of European democracy. This is Europe, for goodness sake. We're not talking about Saudi Arabia or Eritrea or other totalitarian states. It's Europe in the 21st century. And yet we are going down the path of totalitarianism because of gutless virtue signalling. And those on the regressive left who spend all their time obsessing about the far right, the reason the far right is on the rise is because of decisions like this. So unless they wake up and realise that, then sadly we're going to see this situation escalate, and there may well be turmoil on the streets. You know, with the Islamist attacks that we're having, with real social problems, the consequences of this are very profound. And if Europe does go into the abyss, and people think, what was the point of time where this happened? Could it be the time Angela Merkel allowed 1 million people into Germany with, over a short period of time with minimal checks? That could be a turning point, or it could be this. But it will not be forgotten, and it is unforgivable. It really is, because this threatens 500 million people.